Edge of Oblivion. Chapter 1. The briefing. The dimly lit room hummed with tension as the door creaked open. Special Agent John Lawson stepped inside, his sharp eyes scanning the faces around the table. Each person here was a master of their craft, hand-picked for their expertise, but the grim expressions on their faces told Lawson everything he needed to know. This mission was different. The stakes were higher, the risks unfathomable. At the head of the table sat Director Walters, his normally composed demeanor betrayed by the slight tremor in his hand as he motioned for Lawson to take a seat. A large screen flickered to life behind him, displaying images of destruction. Burning buildings, shattered windows, terrified civilians. "We're calling it Operation Edge of Oblivion," Walters began, his voice grave. "A sleeper cell has been activated, and intelligence points to a large-scale attack planned within the next 48 hours. The target, unknown. The method, catastrophic." Lawson leaned forward, every muscle in his body taut with focus. "How certain is this intel?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Walters nodded to Agent Maya Hernandez, the tech specialist seated at the far end. With a few keystrokes, she brought up a map littered with red dots, possible attack locations scattered across major cities. "We intercepted a coded transmission late last night," Hernandez explained. "It took hours to decrypt, but we managed to pull these coordinates. They're spread across 5 cities, but we haven't been able to narrow it down further." Lawson felt the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders. 5 cities, 48 hours, and a team barely assembled. It was a nightmare scenario, and the clock was already ticking. "What's our approach?" Lawson asked, eyes fixed on the chaotic map. Walters sighed, leaning back in his chair. "We split into teams, hit each city simultaneously. We need to root out the sleeper cell before they can execute their plan. Time is not on our side, John." Lawson's mind raced as he began calculating the odds, the potential casualties, the logistics of moving their team into position with such little time. It was nearly impossible. Nearly. "I want Hernandez with me," Lawson stated, breaking the tense silence. "We start with the most populated target. If we're wrong, it'll cost us dearly, but if we're right, we save millions." Walters nodded in agreement, his eyes hardening with resolve. "You have full operational control. We're counting on you, Lawson." As the briefing adjourned, Lawson caught Hernandez's gaze across the table. She gave a curt nod, her expression unreadable. They had worked together before, and he knew she was one of the best. But even the best could falter under this kind of pressure. "Let's get to work," Lawson said, his voice steady. But inside, a storm was brewing. With the clock already counting down, the 2 agents moved swiftly. In less than an hour, they were airborne, heading toward the first city on their list, New York. Below them, the sprawling metropolis was a sea of lights, unaware of the impending danger that could plunge it into chaos. As the jet cut through the night sky, Lawson closed his eyes, going over every detail, every possible scenario. He knew what was at stake. Failure was not an option. But deep down, in the quiet recesses of his mind, a nagging doubt persisted. There were too many variables, too many unknowns, and time was running out faster than they could chase it. The mission had begun, and the edge of oblivion was closer than ever. Chapter 2. The first lead. The black SUV wove through New York's congested streets, the siren's wail cutting through the early morning stillness. Lawson and Hernandez sat in the back, reviewing the latest intel. The city seemed oblivious to the impending threat, but the agents knew better. Every minute lost could be the difference between life and death. "Where are we with the lead?" Lawson asked, not taking his eyes off the digital map displayed on the tablet in his hands. Hernandez swiped through a series of images, grainy surveillance footage from a downtown warehouse. "We traced the transmission source to this location. It's owned by a shell company, which is a dead end. But we pulled these stills from last night. She zoomed in on a figure entering the building, their features obscured by a hood. "Facial recognition?" Lawson asked. "Nothing yet. Whoever it is, they know how to stay off the grid." Hernandez's fingers danced across the screen, bringing up a list of possible suspects. "This is our best lead so far. We have to assume they're connected to the cell." Lawson nodded, his jaw clenched. "We go in quiet. No alarms, no alerts. We need to catch them off guard." The SUV came to a halt a few blocks away from the warehouse. The two agents exited quickly, blending into the shadows as they made their way toward the target. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hustle of the city subdued in the early hours. As they approached the warehouse, Lawson signaled for Hernandez to take the back entrance while he moved toward the front. The building loomed before him, dark and silent, but he could feel the tension in the air, the sense that they were walking into something far bigger than they could see. With practiced ease, Lawson picked the lock and slipped inside. The interior was dimly lit, rows of crates and boxes stacked high, casting long shadows across the floor. Every step he took was measured, careful, his senses heightened. He moved deeper into the building, his gun drawn and ready. The faint hum of machinery buzzed in the background, but otherwise, the place was dead silent. Too silent. A sudden movement caught his eye, a shadow flitting between the crates. Lawson froze, his finger hovering over the trigger. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as he strained to see through the gloom. Then, a sharp sound echoed through the warehouse. A gunshot, followed by a scream. "Hernandez!" Lawson bolted toward the back of the warehouse, his mind racing. Had they been set up? Was this all a trap? He turned a corner just in time to see Hernandez struggling with a masked figure. Her gun knocked from her hand. Without hesitation, Lawson fired, the bullet finding its mark. The assailant crumpled to the ground, and Hernandez staggered back, breathing heavily. "You okay?" Lawson asked, rushing to her side. Hernandez nodded, though she looked shaken. "He was waiting for me. They knew we were coming." Lawson cursed under his breath, realizing the implications. If the cell knew they were onto them, the timeline just got even shorter. "We need to move fast," he said, pulling Hernandez to her feet. "This place is compromised. If they knew we were coming here, they might know about our other teams too." Hernandez grabbed her gun, her hands trembling slightly. "What do we do now?" Lawson looked around, his mind racing. They were running out of time, and the enemy was always one step ahead. "We adapt," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We find out where they're really planning to hit, and we stop them." As they exited the warehouse, Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in the dark, chasing shadows. But there was no turning back now. The edge of Oblivion was looming closer, and it was up to them to pull the world back from the brink. Chapter 3. The Chase. The early morning air was thick with tension as Lawson and Hernandez emerged from the warehouse. The city was waking up around them, oblivious to the silent war unfolding in its midst. But there was no time to dwell on that now. They needed to act, and fast. "We need to regroup," Hernandez said, scanning the street for any sign of the enemy. "If they knew we were coming, they might have more traps set up." Lawson nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. The encounter inside the warehouse had shaken him, but it also gave him something. A sliver of information he hadn't considered before. What if the attack isn't spread across multiple cities? He muttered, mostly to himself. Hernandez frowned. "What do you mean?" Lawson's mind raced as he pieced it together. "Think about it. If they knew we were onto them, why spread out the attack? Why not focus everything on one target? Hit us where it hurts the most all at once." Hernandez's eyes widened as she caught on. "You think they're converging on a single location?" Lawson nodded. "It's a diversion. They spread us thin, made us chase ghosts in different cities while they're planning something bigger, right here in New York." Hernandez's face paled as she realized the implications. If you're right, the other teams are chasing decoys. We're the only ones who can stop this. Lawson pulled out his phone, quickly typing a message to the other teams, ordering them to redirect their efforts back to New York. But he knew it might already be too late. "We need to find their real target," Lawson said, urgency lacing his words. "They wouldn't have just one operative here. There's got to be more, and they'll lead us to it." Hernandez nodded, her expression resolute. "Let's get moving." They made their way back to the SUV, but before they could reach it, Lawson's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, an incoming call from an unknown number. His instincts screamed at him to ignore it, but something compelled him to answer. "Lawson," he said, his voice tense. A low, distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "You're running out of time, Agent Lawson." Lawson's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "You should have stayed away," the voice continued, ignoring the question. "Now, millions will pay the price for your interference." "Where is the target?" Lawson demanded, but the line went dead before he could get a response. He stared at the phone, a cold dread settling in his gut. They were toying with him, and the clock was still ticking. Hernandez looked at him, concern etched on her face. "What did they say?" "They know we're close," Lawson replied, shoving the phone back into his pocket. "And they're daring us to stop them." Hernandez opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden explosion in the distance cut her off. The ground beneath them trembled, and a plume of smoke rose into the sky, dark and ominous. "Jesus," Hernandez breathed, her eyes wide with horror. "That's Midtown." Lawson didn't waste a second. "Get in the car. Now." They raced toward the explosion, the city around them descending into chaos. Sirens wailed as emergency vehicles rushed to the scene, and panicked civilians filled the streets, fleeing from the source of the blast. As they approached Midtown, the scale of the destruction became apparent. A large office building had been reduced to rubble, the surrounding area engulfed in flames. Firefighters and paramedics were already on the scene, battling the inferno and tending to the wounded. Lawson pulled the SUV to a stop, and they both jumped out, the heat from the fire hitting them like a wall. He scanned the area, looking for anything that might give them a clue, but there was nothing, just chaos and devastation. "This isn't the main attack," Hernandez said, her voice shaky. "It can't be. They wouldn't tip their hand like this." Lawson agreed. The explosion was tragic, but it felt too small, too isolated. It was a warning, a message that the real attack was still to come. "We need to get ahead of this," Lawson said, his mind working overtime. "We need to find out where they're going to strike next." But before they could move, another explosion rocked the city, this time much closer. The force of it knocked them both to the ground, the sound of shattering glass and crumbling concrete filling the air. Lawson scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're hitting multiple locations at once," he realized. "It's a coordinated strike." Hernandez pulled herself up, her face pale but determined. "We need to get to the command center. They'll have real-time intel." Lawson nodded, and they raced back to the SUV, speeding toward the command center downtown. As they drove, more explosions echoed across the city, each one a chilling reminder that they were running out of time. The enemy was always one step ahead, and with each passing second, the edge of Oblivion drew nearer. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The command center buzzed with frantic activity as Lawson and Hernandez burst through the doors. Agents and analysts hurried from one station to another, their faces etched with anxiety. The situation had escalated beyond anything they could have anticipated. The city was under siege, and they were running out of time to stop it. Director Walters met them at the entrance, his expression grave. "We're getting reports of coordinated attacks across the city. So far, for confirmed explosions, and more are likely on the way." Lawson didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need to find out where the main attack is going to happen." These are just distractions. They're building up to something bigger. Walters nodded and led them to the central hub where a large digital map of New York was displayed on a wall of monitors. Red dots marked the locations of the explosions, with new ones appearing every few minutes. The map looked like a battlefield, and in many ways it was. "We've been trying to identify a pattern," Walters explained, gesturing to the map. "But so far, nothing concrete. The attacks seem random, but they must be connected somehow." Lawson studied the map, his mind racing. If the enemy had gone to such lengths to create chaos, it had to serve a purpose. But what was it? What were they trying to draw attention away from? Could it be a larger target? Hernandez asked, stepping closer to the map. Something central that would cause maximum damage? Walters frowned. "We've considered that, but we haven't been able to narrow it down. The city has dozens of high-value targets, government buildings, financial institutions, transportation hubs." Lawson's eyes flickered over the map, mentally connecting the dots. Then it hit him. The locations of the explosions, they weren't just random. They were forming a perimeter. "They're creating a kill zone," Lawson realized, his voice low but urgent. "They're isolating an area, trapping people inside." Walters looked at him, alarmed. "What are you suggesting?" Lawson pointed to the map, drawing an invisible line between the red dots. "Look at the pattern. They're cutting off access to Midtown. Every explosion is strategically placed to block the main routes in and out." Hernandez's eyes widened as she saw it too. "They're funneling people into the center. They want as many casualties as possible." Walters turned pale as he realized the full extent of the plan. But what's the final target? Lawson's mind raced, trying to think like the enemy. If he were them, what would he do? What would be the most devastating blow? "Grand Central Station," Hernandez whispered, the horror of it sinking in. Lawson nodded grimly. "It's one of the busiest transportation hubs in the city. If they strike during rush hour, with thousands of people packed inside." Walters didn't need to hear more. He barked orders to the agents around him. "Lock down Grand Central immediately. Evacuate the area and deploy all available units. We need to stop them before it's too late." As the room erupted into action, Lawson turned to Hernandez. "We need to be there. If they've planned this so meticulously, they'll have operatives on the ground. We're the only ones who can stop them." Hernandez nodded, already moving toward the exit. "Let's go." The drive to Grand Central was a blur, the city around them spiraling into chaos. Sirens wailed from every direction, and the streets were filled with panicked civilians trying to flee the carnage. But Lawson knew they couldn't let themselves get distracted. Their focus had to be on stopping the attack, no matter the cost. As they approached the station, they could see the crowds, people pouring out of the building, but not nearly fast enough. Inside, it would be a crush of bodies, all potential targets. They parked the SUV a block away and approached on foot, blending into the chaos. The air was thick with fear, but Lawson and Hernandez moved with purpose, their eyes scanning for anything out of place. They entered Grand Central through a side entrance, slipping past the overwhelmed security. The main concourse was a sea of people, all trying to push their way to the exits. It was a perfect setup for a devastating attack. "We need to find the operatives," Lawson said, his voice tense. "They'll be here," blending into the crowd. Hernandez nodded, her gaze sharp as she scanned the throng. "We're looking for anyone who doesn't belong. Anyone too calm, too focused." They split up, moving through the crowd, searching for the telltale signs of the enemy. Lawson's pulse quickened as he noticed a man standing near the center of the concourse, his posture too rigid, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. Lawson followed the man's gaze to a large duffel bag left unattended near a column. His heart skipped a beat. "Bomb!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "Everyone, get down!" The crowd erupted into chaos as people scrambled for cover. Lawson sprinted toward the bag, his mind racing. if he could just reach it in time. But the man he'd been watching moved faster. He lunged toward the bag, reaching for something inside. Lawson knew he couldn't let him activate it. In one swift motion, Lawson drew his gun and fired. The man crumpled to the ground, his hand inches from the detonator. The crowd screamed and surged toward the exits, the panic reaching a fever pitch. But Lawson couldn't relax. There could be more bombs, more operatives. Hernandez rushed over to him, her face pale but determined. "We need to sweep the area. There could be more devices." Lawson nodded, but as they moved to search, another figure caught his eye. This one slipping through the crowd, heading for the lower levels. Something about the way they moved set off alarms in Lawson's mind. "Go! I'll handle this!" Lawson shouted to Hernandez as he took off after the figure, weaving through the fleeing masses. He followed the suspect down a set of stairs into the bowels of the station. The noise from the concourse faded, replaced by the echoing footsteps in the dimly lit corridor. Lawson's breath came in sharp bursts, but he forced himself to stay focused. The figure ahead of him disappeared around a corner. Lawson slowed, gun raised, every sense on high alert. He turned the corner, and there, standing at the end of the hallway, was the figure, waiting for him. The man turned slowly, his face partially obscured by shadows. But Lawson recognized him immediately. He was the leader of the cell, the mastermind behind the attacks. "You're too late," the man said, his voice calm, almost smug. Lawson leveled his gun at him. "Not if I stop you right here." The man smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable. The true target. It's not what you think." Before Lawson could react, the man threw something to the ground. A small, black device that emitted a high-pitched whine. Lawson's world went white as the flashbang detonated, blinding him, leaving him reeling. He staggered back, trying to regain his senses, but it was too late. The man was gone, and the realization hit Lawson like a freight train. He'd been played. Again. The true target was still out there, and time was slipping away. Chapter 5. The True Target. Lawson's vision slowly returned. The harsh afterimage of the flashbang still burned into his retinas. He blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the disorientation. The cold, echoing hallway stretched out before him, empty save for the distant murmur of the crowd above. His pulse pounded in his ears, a frantic rhythm that matched the growing sense of urgency gnawing at his gut. He had been so sure, too sure. The mastermind's words echoed in his mind. The true target. It's not what you think. "Damn it!" Lawson muttered under his breath, cursing his own arrogance. He had underestimated his enemy, fallen right into their trap. The explosions, the chaos, the bomb at Grand Central, they were all part of the deception, designed to draw his attention away from the real plan. But what was it? What could be more devastating than an attack on one of the city's busiest transportation hubs? Lawson pushed the thought aside, forcing himself to focus. He needed to find Hernandez, regroup, and figure out their next move. He turned and sprinted back up the stairs, taking them two at a time, his heart hammering in his chest. He had no time to lose. Every second could mean the difference between life and death. As he emerged back into the main concourse, he scanned the chaotic scene. The evacuation was still in progress, but the crowds had thinned out considerably. Hernandez was coordinating with a group of agents near the entrance, her expression grim. She spotted Lawson and hurried over, concern flickering in her eyes. "What happened down there?" she asked, breathless. "Flashbang," Lawson replied, still slightly disoriented. "He got away." But Hernandez, this was never the real target. Hernandez frowned, her mind quickly grasping the implications. "What do you mean? If Grand Central wasn't the primary target, then what is?" Lawson shook his head, frustrated. "I don't know yet, but we need to figure it out. Fast. We've been playing catch-up this whole time. reacting instead of anticipating. We can't afford to make that mistake again. Hernandez's brow furrowed as she thought through the possibilities. They wanted us here, distracted. So what are they trying to keep us away from? Lawson's mind raced as he considered their options. New York was a sprawling metropolis, filled with potential targets, each one a high-value opportunity for a terrorist attack. But it had to be something big, something that would overshadow even the devastation they'd already caused. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit him. The UN headquarters. Hernandez's eyes widened as she realized the magnitude of what he was suggesting. Of course, the General Assembly is in session today. Every world leader, every diplomat, they're all there. Lawson nodded, his mouth set in a grim line. It's the perfect target. Take out the UN, and you send a message to the entire world. We need to move now, Hernandez said, already turning to relay orders to the other agents. I'll coordinate with Walters and get a security detail over there. But we need to be on the ground inside the building. Lawson didn't argue. They were already racing against the clock, and if the enemy was as coordinated as they seemed, they wouldn't have much time to prevent the attack. The two agents moved quickly, exiting the station and jumping back into their SUV. The drive to the United Nations building was tense. Every passing second a reminder of how close they were to disaster. The city around them was still in chaos, emergency vehicles weaving through traffic, and civilians fleeing in every direction. But Lawson forced himself to focus on the task at hand. They couldn't afford any more distractions. As they neared the UN, the heightened security was immediately apparent. Barricades had been set up, and heavily armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The tension in the air was palpable, the sense that something terrible was about to happen hanging over the city like a dark cloud. Lawson and Hernandez flashed their credentials and were waved through the checkpoints. Inside, the atmosphere was even more charged. Diplomats and officials were being hurriedly escorted to safe zones, their faces pale with fear. The normally serene halls of the UN were now a battleground, a place where the fate of the world could be decided in the next few minutes. "We need to find the bomb," Lawson said, his voice low and determined. "They wouldn't go to all this trouble just for a direct assault. It's got to be something bigger, something that can take out the entire building." Hernandez nodded, her expression resolute. "We'll split up. I'll head to the security office, see if we can get access to the surveillance feeds. You check the most likely places they'd plant a device, basement, structural supports, anywhere they can maximize damage." "Got it," Lawson replied, already moving toward the nearest stairwell. As he descended into the depths of the building, his thoughts raced. The UN was a sprawling complex, with countless nooks and crannies where a bomb could be hidden. But he had to trust his instincts, follow the logic that had kept him alive through countless missions. The basement was dimly lit, the hum of machinery filling the air. Lawson moved with caution, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. His heart pounded in his chest, the tension almost unbearable. He knew he was running out of time, knew that every second brought them closer to catastrophe. And then he saw it. A large, unmarked crate, tucked away in a corner, almost hidden from view. It was too large to be overlooked, too out of place to be anything other than what he feared. Lawson approached slowly, his gun drawn. He could see wires snaking out from beneath the lid, leading to a small, black device attached to the side. Timer. 15 minutes. He cursed under his breath, his mind racing. He needed Hernandez, needed the bomb squad, needed more time. But time was the one thing he didn't have. With shaking hands, Lawson reached for his radio. "Hernandez, I found it. Basement level, southeast corner. 15 minutes on the timer." Hernandez's voice crackled through the earpiece, filled with urgency. "I'm on my way with the squad. Just hold on, John." But Lawson knew he couldn't wait. He'd seen enough bombs in his career to know that this one was sophisticated, too sophisticated for him to disarm alone. But he had to try. He couldn't let the enemy win, not like this. He knelt beside the crate, his hands trembling as he examined the device. The timer ticked down, each second a reminder of how close they were to the edge. 13 minutes. Lawson took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He had no choice but to start cutting wires, hoping against hope that he'd make the right choices. 10 minutes. His mind raced, trying to remember everything he knew about bomb disposal. But this one was different, more advanced, meant to thwart even the most skilled agents. 7 minutes. Hernandez's voice came through again, this time closer. "We're almost there, John. Just hang on." But Lawson knew it was too late. There wasn't enough time. He had to make a decision, one that could mean the difference between life and death for thousands of people. 5 minutes. His hands hovered over the wires, sweat dripping down his brow. There was no room for error. He had to trust his instincts, trust that he could still save the day. 3 minutes. Lawson took a deep breath, his fingers closing around the wire that felt right. The one that, in his gut, he knew he had to cut. 2 minutes. He closed his eyes, said a silent prayer, and severed the wire. The timer froze. The device powered down. Lawson exhaled, the tension leaving his body in a rush. He'd done it. He'd stopped the bomb, saved the UN, saved the city. But as Hernandez and the bomb squad arrived, their faces pale with relief, Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in the dark, that the mastermind had one more card to play, one more move before the edge of oblivion. Chapter 6. The Final Gambit. The tension in the room was palpable, every agent and bomb squad member holding their breath as they watched Lawson's trembling hands disconnect the last wire. When the timer stopped, a collective sigh of relief swept through the group. The city, and perhaps the world, had been spared a devastating catastrophe, at least for the moment. Hernandez was the first to speak, her voice a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. "John, you did it. We're clear." But Lawson didn't share her sense of victory. He knew the mastermind they were dealing with, and this was too clean, too easy. There had to be more to the plan, something they hadn't yet uncovered. "Don't let your guard down," Lawson warned, his voice edged with tension. "This might have been a decoy." Hernandez frowned, but before she could respond, Director Walter's voice crackled through the radio. "Agents, report back immediately. We've just received intel that could change everything." Lawson and Hernandez exchanged a quick glance before hurrying back up the stairs, leaving the bomb squad to secure the disarmed device. The gravity of Walter's message hung over them like a dark cloud as they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the UN building. What could be so urgent that it eclipsed the discovery of a bomb? When they reached the command center, Walters was already there, pacing back and forth, his face a mask of grim determination. On the large screen behind him, a live satellite feed of New York City was displayed, with key locations highlighted in red. "Listen up," Walters began without preamble. "We've just intercepted a final transmission from the terrorist cell. They've been one step ahead of us this whole time, but now we know why." Lawson and Hernandez leaned in, their eyes locked on Walters. "The bomb in the basement was a backup plan," Walters continued, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The primary attack is set to trigger from a remote location, and it's not just targeting the UN. It's targeting the entire city." Hernandez's breath caught in her throat. "How?" Walters pointed to the screen, where the satellite feed zoomed in on a nondescript building on the outskirts of Manhattan. "We believe they've rigged the city's power grid. If they succeed, they'll detonate a series of coordinated explosions across the entire grid, triggering a massive chain reaction." Lawson's heart sank as he realized the full extent of the threat. "It'll take out the whole city. Millions of people." Walters nodded grimly. "And the mastermind, the one who's been orchestrating this whole thing, is on site, overseeing the operation personally." Lawson clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had been led around like puppets, reacting to the enemy's moves instead of anticipating them. But this was their last chance to turn the tables. "We need to move now," Lawson said, his voice hard with resolve. "If we can take out the mastermind and disable the control center, we can stop the chain reaction before it starts." Walters nodded. "I'm sending you both in with a full tactical team. This is our last shot. Don't let them trigger that grid." Lawson and Hernandez quickly suited up, their movements mechanical, focused. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on them, but they pushed it aside. This was what they had trained for, what they had spent their lives preparing for. As they boarded the helicopter that would take them to the target location, the city below seemed eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. The night sky was clear, the lights of Manhattan twinkling innocently beneath them, unaware of the impending danger. Hernandez checked her gear, her face set in grim determination. "This is it, John. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Lawson nodded, his mind already working through the possible scenarios. "They'll be heavily guarded. We'll need to hit fast and hard, take out the control center before they even know we're there." The helicopter's descent was swift and silent, dropping the team onto the rooftop of the target building. The tactical team spread out, securing the perimeter while Lawson and Hernandez made their way inside. The building was dark, the only light coming from the dim emergency lights that cast eerie shadows across the concrete walls. It felt like stepping into the heart of the enemy's lair, a place where every corner could conceal a trap. They moved with precision, sweeping each room, each corridor, until they reached the control center deep within the building. The door was reinforced, but a quick breach by the tactical team cleared the way. Inside, a bank of monitors displayed feeds from all over the city, each one showing critical points in the power grid. In the center of the room stood the mastermind, his back to them, calmly issuing orders to the remaining operatives. "Freeze!" Hernandez shouted, her gun trained on the man's back. The mastermind turned slowly, a cold, calculating smile on his lips. "You're too late," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "The sequence is already in motion. You can't stop it." Lawson's gaze darted to the main console, where a countdown had begun. 5 minutes. "We'll see about that," Lawson growled, rushing to the console. But the controls were locked, the system rigged with failsafes. He needed a way to override it. Hernandez kept her gun trained on the mastermind, her finger hovering over the trigger. "Give us the override code, now." The mastermind chuckled, shaking his head. "I admire your determination, but you're wasting your time. The city will burn, and there's nothing you can do about it." Lawson's mind raced as he tried to find a way to disable the system, but it was too complex, too well protected. Then an idea struck him, something risky, something that could either save the city or destroy it completely. "Hernandez, cover me," Lawson ordered, pulling out a small device from his tactical vest. It was a signal jammer designed to disrupt remote detonators. If he could just position it close enough to the control panel. "You're playing with fire, Agent," the mastermind sneered. "One wrong move, and you'll bring the whole grid down yourself." Lawson ignored him, carefully placing the jammer on the console. He activated it, praying that it would work, that it would disrupt the signal before the countdown reached 0. 3 minutes. The tension in the room was suffocating. Hernandez kept her gun steady, her eyes never leaving the mastermind, who continued to smile as if he knew something they didn't. 2 minutes. The jammer hummed as it tried to disrupt the signal. But the countdown continued, relentless, unstoppable. Lawson could feel the seconds slipping away, could feel the weight of the city's fate pressing down on him. 1 minute. The mastermind's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "It's over, Agent Lawson. You failed." But just as the countdown reached 30 seconds, the monitors flickered. The numbers froze, and then, one by one, the screens went dark. Lawson held his breath, waiting, hoping. The silence stretched on, heavy with anticipation. And then the countdown reset. The system powered down. He had done it. The chain reaction had been stopped. Lawson turned to Hernandez, relief flooding through him. But before he could speak, the mastermind lunged. In one swift motion, he pulled out a concealed weapon and fired. The shot echoed in the small room. Hernandez stumbled, her gun dropping to the floor. She clutched her side, blood seeping through her fingers. "No!" Lawson shouted, raising his gun and firing. The mastermind crumpled to the ground. The smug smile finally wiped from his face. Lawson rushed to Hernandez's side, his heart pounding in his chest. "Maya, stay with me. You're going to be okay." Hernandez tried to smile, but the pain was too much. "John, you stopped him. You saved the city." Lawson's voice shook with emotion. "We saved the city. Don't talk like that. You're going to make it." The tactical team stormed in, securing the area, but Lawson barely noticed them. All he could focus on was Hernandez, his partner, his friend. As the medics arrived and began treating her wound, Lawson felt a deep sense of exhaustion wash over him. The edge of Oblivion had been close, too close, but they had pulled back from it just in time. The city was safe, the threat neutralized, but the cost had been high, and the scars would remain. As the sun began to rise over New York, casting a golden light over the city, Lawson allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had won, but the fight against those who would plunge the world into chaos was never truly over. For now, though, they had survived, and that was enough. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.